we need to just focus on having farmers, having scientists, having everybody that's actually involved in agriculture just speak up a little bit more and spread that information out to a wider audience.
So welcome everyone to the Swine Canada podcast. I am Dan Columbus and I will be your host for today's episode. And with me today I have Clinton Monchuk, who is Executive Director at Farm Food Care Saskatchewan. So welcome to the show, Clinton.
Thank you very much for having me, Dan.
Yeah, we appreciate you coming on and to talk about the topic today, which will be communication, which I think is important. Before we get there, though, just because some people might not have had the pleasure of meeting you yet or know who you are, I'll just ask you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your journey so far.
Sure. So it's been a long one, so I'm not too sure if we can cover all of it in the podcast. But so I started. I grew up on a family farm outside of Lanigan, Saskatchewan. We had a dairy farm, beef farm, grain farm, kind of all mixed together. Really tweaked my interest for the agriculture industry. So I went to school at the University of Saskatchewan. I'm an ag economist, I guess by profession. Did a few different jobs, traveled around, went to the United States and worked in Washington, D.C., worked in Guadalajara, Mexico for a little bit. Did a little stint in lobbying in Ottawa, which was kind of fun and trying to understand that. Then I came back and ran the marketing board for Saskatchewan Chicken, and then luckily fell into this job with Farm Food Care. So I've been doing this now for about 7 years, the Executive Director of Farm Food Care Saskatchewan, and primarily the role with us is to just have conversations and engagement with consumers about what farmers and ranchers are doing. So I like to say I've been talking about farming for all my life, and now somebody's willing to pay me for it. So I think it's a great job for me. I absolutely love it, and I have 2 kids. Married into a ranching family from Oklahoma, so we own a ranch down in Oklahoma as well. And my kids are 15 now and 11, so growing.
The Nutrition Athena, Shakespeare Mill, Farmhouse, and Nutrition Partners Nutrition Group offer the full range of nutritional product based on extensive research and developments, and a solid team of experts all across Canada. Our objective is to provide cost-effective solutions, innovation, and support to producer from the entire Canadian swine industry.
Yeah, so I like the diverse background and experience and everything, and I think it fits very well with now, like you said, your current role and talking about agriculture. And I think the other part of it too is, going out and teaching people almost how to talk about their farming and their practices in agriculture, right? Because there are ways to do it right, and there are ways to do it maybe not so right. We'll get into that a little bit later. I think we'll start with just the idea of, like, you gave a presentation recently on why sharing the farm story matters, right? And I think that's a good way to start, and just to talk about why does it matter and why is this important?
Yeah, so the big thing, if you kind of look at the general demographics here in Canada, you have less than 3% of the population that's actually growing the food, that's actively engaged in growing food here in this country. So that leaves another 97% that, don't have that intimate experience. So as a result of that, you have some voids of information. And I made the comment during that presentation that not only when just the sheer fact of not seeing farms. So I did my master's in Guelph. I failed to mention that before, but I did my master's in Guelph. And back in the day when I was taking my master's, you could actually drive from Guelph to downtown Toronto and you could see farmers' fields, and you really can't a lot anymore. And it's a little bit disheartening, but I understand, like, the way we're growing as a country, people are going into suburbs and taking up some of that farmland. But you don't actually see that. So if you live and you work in the greater Toronto area or Montreal or Vancouver, you don't even see agriculture anymore. So if there's questions that these individuals have, we need to make sure that we're kind of giving a little bit of an olive branch to make sure that we can explain some of those things that are maybe tougher conversations that, nobody's ever taught them or told them about, right?
Yeah, it's interesting when you say, because I'm from I went to Guelph and I'm also from Southwestern Ontario. So to see that disappear, and
Yeah.
now it's like one big highway right from, KW to Toronto, and you don't see anything is, it's incredible. And it might lead to like that, what seems to be the consumer perception that you have that the farm with a couple of pigs and a couple of chickens and everything's nice and happy and everything, right? And I guess that leads into the next question. What are consumers' views of the farming practices, and how are they seeing what we do?
Yeah, so in a lot of instances, their views or their perceptions, it's no different than you or me. We take information from people we value or information online that we think is a valued source, and we hold that as the truth. Okay, so again, because there's not a lot of farmers, some of the information that gets fed in through our algorithms on social media, sometimes it's not overly positive about agriculture, but they do have questions. So if you think of the hog industry, for an example, they do have questions. How are hogs being raised, right? And what are they eating? How are they being cared for? What kind of medications are being used? So these are questions that they honestly want to find answers for. But as soon as you go online and you put in the Google search some of those questions, sometimes bad stuff shows up, right? And it's from special interest groups, animal rights activists, things like that. And it's unfortunate because sometimes a lot of that negative feed ends up filling in the voids of information they have. So therein lies some of what, the conversations we need to have with consumers, in that, this is actually how we grow hogs. This is how we care for them. Part of my family is heavily involved in the hog industry here in Saskatchewan, and I think of all the work, all the care that goes into raising hogs, and if consumers could just see that and be able to talk to them, I think it would change their perception. But it's just trying to make those links where you can actually have that engagement, right?
Yeah, so it's interesting when you say that. It's like, filling in the void or where the information needs to happen. But at least my impression seems to be that it's that small group that are loud that tend to take over the conversation, right? We've seen that in other aspects, in multiple things too, right? So uh, how do we combat that? Maybe combat's the wrong word. And I guess the other question would be like, are food producers trusted by the public the way they were in the past, right? Like, are we the people that should be putting that information out there, or are we
Yeah.
big ag?
So it's interesting, and here's, we get a lot of our research done by the Canadian Centre for Food Integrity, and some of the data that the newest data, anyways, that's talking exactly about this is saying that, you know what, you do have those outliers like you had mentioned. Okay, so you have some of those radical individuals, and you can think about it in all aspects of our life. You can take politics, you can take different ideological kind of ideas of medicine or stuff like that. You do have these outliers, and they seem to be extremely loud, right? They're loud outliers. They put a lot of stuff on social media. But the bulk of Canadian consumers actually are supportive of the practices we do, or they're just not too sure. So, and by the bulk of them, I would say you're probably 60 to 70% of Canadian consumers are kind of in that middle ground where they think we're doing a good job, right? They know food shows up in the grocery store. They kind of have trust a little bit anyways in the inspection systems and all the stuff that Health Canada and the CFIA does, if they actually understand what CFIA and Health Canada does. But therein lies, so you have those loud individuals, but you really have the bulk of individuals that actually want to learn more. And one of the studies that was done was asking, well, what percentage of Canadians are actually interested in farming practices? And it turns out 60% are interested in knowing. Now, this gets back to the second part of your question: who should be talking about this? So my first response from this is everybody in the agriculture industry should. It shouldn't just be on, say, farmers. It shouldn't just be on researchers. It should be all of us. And this is where I think we've hit a little bit of a realization in the last 10 years that prior to the last decade, I think we were rolling on a high, right? There was some kind of talk on the animal rights side and maybe some rumblings around genetically modified foods and some of the herbicides or fungicides that we would use. But it's gotten louder in terms of maybe picking up momentum and becoming a little bit more mainstream. You see some of the, say, bills that are being introduced in the Canadian Parliament that are maybe not always science-based, right? Or some of the influences with restaurants or grocery chains from outside sources that, again, are not necessarily based on science. And the information we have indicates that if you are involved in ag, so first of all, if you want to see a hierarchy, farmers and ranchers, they are the number one trusted source for information when it comes to your food. And they have been forever. This has not dropped. It's been about the same for pretty much ever. And as a result of that, we're really encouraging farmers and ranchers to get out there and talk to people. But when you go down the list, you see that, researchers, people who are doing the development of new technologies, the people in the field doing field work, whether it's inspectors going out to hog barns or people in the labs, we need them to actually talk about this too. And here is where this is probably the biggest divergence, right? And I know you and I have talked about this before, that sometimes when you get in a room with a scientist that has just done new data on, I don't know, loin length or something like that with hogs, they go super in depth and trying to get all this information out. And it's like, whoa, hold down. Hey, I used to grow cows, right? Like I don't know all that stuff. So this is one of those hurdles that we have to get through, in that when we talk to people, make sure we talk their language, right? And it's no different. And I gave the comparison of the coal industry, right? If you're a coal miner, you have that perception of what they are. And if you actually met somebody who's a coal miner and they start talking about some of the different acronyms that they use in the industry, like, you just get confused, right? You can't follow it. So in a similar way, we need to just focus on having farmers, having scientists, having everybody that's actually involved in agriculture just speak up a little bit more and spread that information out to a wider audience. Because the more it gets done, the more conversations we have, the more engagement that happens, just the better food literacy that exists throughout the country.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, we all have a story to tell, right? And I think that's important. I think along with that, though, like you said, is how we are telling that story. And I have had times where, somebody in my friend group says something that I'm just like, oh, that's not the way it is. And I will try to correct them, and it doesn't go well all the time, right? So clearly I'm doing something wrong with them. So I guess we can move into how do you frame that message? And I know you said, it's all about making sure you're speaking the same language as them. And that's something we tell our students, right? 3-minute thesis, stuff like that. They push back all the time. I can't talk about what I do in 3 minutes. I'm like, well, then you need to practice, because you can't, right? But I guess the other part of that too. So one is like, how do we frame that message? And then I guess, how does it change depending on who you're talking to, like who your audience is?
Yeah, so it's interesting. When I took my master's, one of the comments that was made by a professor was, if you can't put it in one page to your upper management, then it's likely not going to get read. Okay. So think about, in the same idea, the 3-minute conversation, and we actually drilled it down at the conference to a 30-second like interest, an elevator speech, just trying to get some interest to draw in that conversation. That is where you can practice yourself. So the idea of, what would be interesting to somebody that you meet randomly on a bus or on a plane or at a sporting event, whatever, who happens to be sitting beside you, to drum up that conversation? In a lot of instances, all it takes is, boom, I actually work in the food industry. Oh, wow, I eat. There you go. Right off the bat, you have a value of food, right? Everybody values food. If we didn't value food, we'd be dead, right? So we have a value of food. So it tweaks the interest to kind of get going on that conversation about different aspects that you know. Okay. So I don't know a lot about the hog industry, so I'm not going to be the expert on that, but I can talk about cattle. I can talk about my grain farm. I can talk about how long we've been farming. I can talk about a lot of these things. And it turns out when you actually open up about, this stuff, it is super interesting to somebody else. And I happened to be, I think I was in Florida. I took my kids to Disney World, and I was sitting in the hot tub, and this older gentleman came in and sat beside me, and I think he was from upstate New York or something like that. And we chatted for probably an hour just about farming, because he was so interested in some of these, and he had not a lick of idea of what it was like to farm in the prairies, whether in the United States or Canada. And we just talked forever about it. And he asked so many questions. And this kind of gets to the other side of things. Making sure you have an engaging conversation means you're listening truly to what the questions that they have to answer them. And when you do this, when you have this engaging conversation, you find a lot of information comes out, but you learn about them as well, right? So it's got to be a two-way street. And I always make the comment that, if you want to have a debate with somebody that's got, a viewpoint over here and you have a viewpoint over here, like you said before, like they're wrong about that, right? So you have this debate, and in a debate, somebody always loses. I've been a Leafs fan my entire life. I know what it's like to be a loser. So I'd rather have that discussion than a debate where you have winners and losers. So case in point, with that individual that you're having that tougher conversation, a lot of times I actually ask, why do you think that? Why is it that you believe that? Is that, have you seen that? In a lot of instances, they haven't, right? So that perception was based on something that they've read or they've seen on a video, but they've never actually experienced it, right? And unless, that's truly something where they were at a different farm, and then you can have that conversation about that. But when you truly get down to it, they're interested in understanding more. And when you can understand a little bit more of that process of how they think, then it kind of helps you answer some of those questions. Because really, at the end of the day, all of us who are producing food, I like to make the comment that we eat what we produce as well. I have a cute little video of my daughter when she was, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 in the combine, and we were straight cutting yellow peas. Okay, so we were harvesting our yellow peas. And she was pretty cute, talking about, when I grow up, I want to be a peas farmer because I love what you do, and really cute. But the reason why I like to play the video is because afterwards I said, we ate those peas. We actually eat the peas that we produce on our farm. And I said, what's interesting too is 10 days before we actually harvested those, we sprayed them with glyphosate, with Roundup, to do a pre-harvest kill of the weeds. And I said, I love my daughter, and there is nothing I would do to ever hurt her, and we consume those peas. And it's a game changer right there. No different than, I know all the hog farmers out there, they eat their own pork, right? That growing up, I drank my own milk. We ate our own beef, right? Like a lot of people don't understand that. And they have the viewpoint that, you have these huge barns or this huge equipment that you're doing this, and there's no way you're actually eating your own stuff. But we are. And that therein lies just a great message back to consumers in terms of the value that we have on our own food that we produce. We value it. We consume it. My little girl consumes it. And then that is where that link between the values of not only my family, but the values of food come in, and we can have that conversation go a little bit deeper. So things like that I think are great to have the understanding. There's other things we can do as well, but having, getting to the core of those values. We all have some similar values, and that's when you can have a lot of that great discussion.
Yeah, I think, like you said, a lot of people, I don't know why it's not something that they just think of, that we are eating this as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right? There's not a secret stash of food for farmers and whatever that we're eating and selling the rest to the public. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
get that message across. So I guess you've been doing this for a while. So I'm interested, when you talk to people and you see how they're communicating in that, like, what is one thing that you see that they tend to get right? And then what is one thing that a lot of people tend to get wrong?
So I think the one thing that I've never actually met a farmer or a rancher who wasn't passionate, right? And passion shows through. So I think everybody gets that right. When I talk to my Uncle Florian or my cousins who farm on the hog side, they absolutely love the hog industry, and they will talk as long as I got time about it, right? So you can tell that passion that exists. One thing in terms that we get wrong sometimes is how we feel we have to convince them, right? So sometimes you'll meet somebody who's, I don't know, say a vegan or something, and we feel obligated to get them to change their mind. But that's not really what we're about. We're making sure that they have the truthful information about how that food is being produced, so then they don't share that animal rights video that comes the next time in their feed. And I'll give you an example of that. So we were doing a tour with, it was called the Young Professionals of Canada. And we had a tour. We went to a big feedlot in Saskatchewan. And afterwards, one of the ladies on the bus came up and said, I just want to tell you all that I'm actually a vegan. I said, that's okay. I like beef. And she said, yeah, but I want to let you know I was super nervous about going to the feedlot today because of all the videos that I've seen of, the cattle industry. And I said, so what do you think now that you've been through this and you asked your questions? She said, it turns out that actually your level of care is what I want for a level of care in these animals. She said, that's actually a value where we connect on. The difference is you're going to eat that animal. I won't. And I said, that's okay. That's your choice, right? We have lots of choices here in Canada. And she came away with a different point of view. And she said, you know what? I appreciate that because I've never seen that before. And it did change my viewpoint. I'm still not going to eat beef. And I said, that's fine. But she's likely not going to, share that animal rights video that comes by her social media feed next time. So, conversations like that, we get the information, we have that engagement, and it's not meant to necessarily, okay, now I'm going to, buy 20 pounds of bacon and eat them tomorrow, right? It's more that, okay, I trust what farmers and the industry is doing. It's good. They're doing a good job of producing pork. I like that. I can support that. Whether I choose to consume bacon or pork chops or whatever, that's their choice at the end of the day. But at least they have more knowledge of the industry, right?
So one thing you mentioned in the presentation the other week, and I think it was a response to one of the 30-second elevator pitches, right, where you talked about loaded words.
Mm-hmm.
So I think maybe just talk a little bit about what
Yeah.
you mean by a loaded word and what we should be doing instead.
Yeah. So and I've mentioned something like acronyms, or sometimes we can get into and people just get deer in the headlights. But there are certain things that, when you bring up the word castration, right, or tail docking, or, some of these things that like instantaneously kind of bring up a certain viewpoint or vision. Like if and I remember the cattle roundup and castrating the calves and everything like that when we were bringing in them from the summer pastures. I understand that. But for a consumer, they don't understand that as much as if you would say neuter, right? So you're still doing the same thing, but it's something that they could relate to and understand a little bit better. And therein lies what I would say a better approach to doing it. And granted, if you're going to do it and say, we castrate, and then you say it's very similar to neutering. You do that with your pets. We do this as a result to keep the aggression out of the males. You can have those conversations too, but just don't leave it at that. Try to have a conversation, make sure that they understand why you actually do that. And safety for the animals, safety for the people who are handling them, all the way around.
So the last thing I kind of wanted to touch on before we get to the final three, or the take home in the final three, was, this the disconnect between what we view as sustainable versus the public. And maybe this will lead into like that disconnect between policymakers and industry, because I think that's been a big thing lately, right? With the push for sustainability in the public view. So just maybe comment on that a little bit.
Sure. So in a lot of the research that we're looking at, when the general consuming public here in the country, when they see the word sustainable, automatically they think of local. And then second of all, they think of organic. We know from some of the different studies that we've done, you can definitely have local and organic producers who are sustainable, but you can also have large scale commercial farms that are, 3 hours away from a major center that are extremely sustainable as well, right? So what we're trying to do is make sure not only consumers understand the technology that goes in, the new methods of producing pork or grains or whatever it happens to be. We want to make sure that they understand the processes that we do to make sure we are sustainable, that we are respecting the environment that we work in. We're respecting our workers. We're trying to make sure that we're growing this product in a way that's keeping food inflation as tight as possible. Obviously, we can't control all of that, but without the modern farming practices, and you mentioned it right off the start. If you had a couple pigs and a couple chickens, well, you're not going to be, one, very profitable, so you're not going to be around very long. And two, who else are you going to feed, right? Like you can feed your neighbor maybe, and that's it. Well, last I checked in Toronto, not a lot of people have, their neighbor in 50-story high-rise buildings who have hogs or chickens that they're going to actually eat right next door to them, right? So you have to understand, and once you have some of those conversations that, look at what we're doing. When we look at how responsible we are for, taking the manure and injecting it into the ground to make sure then that we don't have to use some of the other fertilizers. Or if we're using fertilizers, what are we doing responsibly to make sure that we're using only what we need to grow the crops that we have to do? Those are conversations that consumers don't necessarily understand. But the more we talk about it, the more, and I have some graphs that show the level of carbon sequestration back into the soils from the practices we're doing around Western Canada. A lot of people, when they see that, their eyes are open, thinking, I never even thought about that. I've only heard the negative. And this is where, it gets to the policymakers. And I have to admit, I get a little bit upset sometimes with policymakers whereby they're only looking at the negative side. They're only looking at the emissions. Well, that's true. We do emit in agriculture. We emit methane. We emit carbon monoxide when we burn start our diesel tractors or combines, whatever it is. But we're also putting back carbon into the soil. And we're doing it through a variety of different ways. And in the hog industry, we're taking that manure and putting it back into the soil to increase organic matter, to reduce the need for synthetic fertilizers. There's a lot of benefits that we're doing that people don't necessarily think of. And I feel that our government doesn't talk about that very often. And that is, it kind of gets me at the heart. and I talk to different people, whether it's in Agriculture Canada or Environment and Climate Change or Health Canada, and say, these are the conversations that consumers need to hear from you too. They need to hear from government the good things we're doing, because otherwise you're kind of adding to some of that misinformation, because we're not saying the full truth of what we're doing for the environment. And I truly feel that can really help us with the public trust conversation. But again, baby steps maybe right now with the government. Hopefully it works out better as we keep on going.
Yeah, hopefully we could start to change that, and maybe
Much.
ag will become a little bit less of the enemy to the environment
Yes,
than it is
exactly.
right now.
Yeah.
So, okay, here's your chance. Take one take-home message or two take-home messages that you want the listeners to get from today's episode.
So the big thing is, I know a lot of you are probably thinking, "Oh yeah, this is great. Somebody else will do it," and I'm here to say, no, you have to do it. And this can be as organic as you want. You could be, my son plays a lot of sports. I randomly talk to different parents in the stands when I'm not coaching about what we do on our own farm. And I tell you, those conversations, just some of those conversations that you're having one-on-one, absolutely are fundamental to this whole game of trying to make sure that the public's trust in agriculture is increasing. Online is another platform. Just post the odd picture of what you're doing. I see a lot of the hog farmers throughout Canada do that. I think it's great. Even if you only have 100 or 200 followers, it's still getting out there. And I think it's great that we're doing that. We just have to all do a little bit. If we all do a little bit, it will increase trust.
Yeah, no, great message.
It's time for our famous three. When it comes to purity, performance, and immunity, High-D has been helping pigs and producers stand strong for years. As a proven source of pure 25OH D3 for diet fortification, High-D is the fastest and most efficient way to provide pigs with essential vitamin D. One product, 7 years on the market, more than 100 research trials, and millions of pigs fed. There's only one High-D. Learn more at dsm.com/HY-D.
Okay, so before I let you go, we have 3 questions that we asked all our
Sure.
guests. The first one, I'm going to change a little bit because we generally do swine resource, but that's not really your thing. So I got, I'm like, what would be your favorite go-to agriculture related resource?
And here's maybe my own plug to my own group, but CanadianFoodFocus.org, absolutely great resource to share with consumers, talks about food, gets people pulled in on the food side, and tells people how that food is being produced here in this country. So CanadianFoodFocus.org.
Yeah, kind of saw that one coming.
Yeah.
Here's another one that I probably can't predict. This is you think of anything outside of ag. A favorite book that you always go back to and keep reading, or one that you've read recently that you really enjoyed that you'd recommend for our listeners.
So it's interesting. I just finished up a book that was had a bad word in its title, but so I can't say that on the podcast. But I like to read now books that kind of relate to history and going forward. So right now I'm reading up on the Israeli-Palestine kind of conflicts of the past. I read up about the Russia-Ukraine. I love the history side of things. So I read a ton of those books or listening to them in my truck or the equipment. So it's just a variety of those different books, and I love them.
You can tell me the name of that other one once we stop recording. Yeah. I'm interested to know what it is. So, and then our final question is, when you look at successful producers or successful leaders and mentors, right? Like, what is a characteristic of those people that you think particularly helps with their success?
I think the ability to talk and communicate. I truly feel, and I think of, again, I'll bring up my own cousins in the hog industry. We talk about it all the time. And I think by understanding what others are doing helps me do a better job as well, right? So the better we get at communicating, the better we are at sharing some of this information. I just think the better the agriculture industry gets as time goes on.
Yeah, that's one that comes up a lot. And I think another obvious one from today's topic, right?
Yeah.
Like it's
Exactly.
Communication obviously is critical to everybody. Yeah. Okay. Thank you once again for coming on. I think it was a great topic and some great information, and hope you enjoyed being on the show.
You bet. Much appreciated for having me. And I look forward maybe another time in the future, Dan.
Yeah. Thank you.